Hello everyone, welcome to another very exciting tutorial. Today we're going to follow our scrolling parallax effects or series that we are using to generate really cool effects using parallax effect. So today I'm going to show you a bunch of cool things that you can use in JavaScript to create really awesome animations. Um, Let me show you what I really mean. So we have an interface. This interface has four sections. So this is the section one. When I press on the next section, notice what happens. It goes to the next page, but also it has a little bit of an animation on the text within that section, as you can see, right? Now I'm already on the fourth section. If I press previous, you can see that the same effect happens. But also another cool thing here is that if you notice, I'm not going to press these. I'm going to use the scroll bar. So I'm going to scroll down using my mouse pad. And on one go, you can see that it goes to the next one, another scroll to the second one, and the third one. Then the same thing happens when I scroll up. So this is a very cool effect. It's usually called full page scroll or one page scroll. I've seen a lot of websites that utilize this effect, and that this website, these kind of websites have very good visual sort of wow factor. So if I scroll down, you can see that this comes instead of this animation, it could be anything. It could be an image, a background image within this area that kind of zooms in as the one we did in the previous tutorials. So without further ado, I would like to ask you if you haven't subscribed to my channel, go ahead and do. We pretty much have a tutorial every day. Sometimes tutorials might take a little bit more time to prepare, so I'm going to post in 2 days, but let's get started. So I'm going to kotus.com, and in the front end section, I'm going to use our front end editor. Here I'm going to add a tag, main tag. Within the main tag, I'm going to create a div with class content, right? So this will hold my sections. So I'm going to have four sections, just like that. And then for the text that we saw, I'm going to create a div with class text. Within the text, I can have a title, like let's say title 1. And then for the subtitle, I can use the paragraph tag and then just say this is subtitle for section 1, right? Now I can go ahead and copy this text div from here and paste it in the other sections, right? So I'm going to paste this here and also here and change this text. So this is going to be for section 2, this is going to be section 3 and section 4. And I'm going to change these as well. So third one and then fourth one, right? You can pretty much put anything you want, but for this tutorial, I'm going to use just a div with the class text with title and subtitle. The next thing, now you can notice that the main contains a div with class content that contains our sections. I also going to add a navigation div or div with class nav. I'm going to put two buttons, one with the prev class and just say previous. And then the same thing I'm going to do instead calling it next. And then here I'm just going to say next, right? So we have these two over here. We are almost done with the markup. So now in the CSS section, I'm going to say my sections, I want them to have a height of 100 VH so that each of them has the full height of the window. And then maybe I'm going to add some colors to each of them. So the first section, let's give it a background of maybe CCC. And then also for the second one, I'm gonna give it a blue violet, and I'm doing that just to see the effect better. And then for the third section, I'm just gonna give it a maybe yellow green, and I'm gonna leave the other section. So we have yellow green here. I just need to make it third one, right? So the second one and the third one. I'm also, because you can see that there is a border around these sections, that's because of the margin in the body. So I'm just going to set the margin to be 0 for now. And now I'm going to style these two to bring them over here. So what I need to do, I know that the class is called text. I'm just going to make sure that the position is absolute and then maybe left 20%. from the left, and then top maybe 50%. So as you can see, it's over here, but now all the titles are one on top of each other. So just to make sure that we have the right text within the sections, be, be make make sure that when you set the position absolute, it's parent. So for example, here, if I open this, you can see that the parent of this class is section. You have to set the position style on the parent. So here I'm just going to set position relative, right? So now you can see that each section has its own text, which looks all right. I also go to kotus.com and then take our UI framework CSS, just like the font that we use here. So I'm going here in the CSS. I'm going to say import URL and then paste this address. You can see that the texts are now a little bit nicer and everything is almost set, which is nice. So the next thing I want to do is the whole parents of this page is main, right? Now you can see that we can scroll down, but that is not what I want based on the effect that I showed you. Right now you can see that there is no scroll bar. So if I just press, scroll down, there will be no scroll bar. So in order to achieve that, what I can do is in the main tag that we added, I'm just going to make sure that the height is 100 VH, the full height of the window, and then I'm going to set the overflow to be hidden, right? So now if I scroll through, I'm right now scrolling down, you can see that there is no scroll bar, and actually it doesn't let me scroll down. Nothing happens, right? So it's kind of fixed on the first section. And that is exactly what I want. So now let's style the uh, nav that contained our buttons. So I'm just going to make sure that the position is fixed, top 20 pixel and left 20 pixel. So like we can see that it just ended up here, and I set it position fixed so that I can always see it in the page, regardless if I go to the next section or the previous section, right? I can also go ahead and style our buttons a little bit so that they are not using default. So I'm going to give it a 10 pixel padding, and then I'm going to make sure that we don't have any border, and then border radius, maybe something like 5 pixel, and maybe font size 14 pixel, just like that. So now we have our buttons over here as well. Now let me save this. Uh, the next thing we want to do is obviously I'm kind of happy with the styles. Now I want to add the interactions. So the first interaction I want to add is when I press on the next button, I want it to go to the next section. So I have to have a reference to all the sections. So I'm just going to create a constant sections document.query selector, and then I know that I have used the tag section for each of those, and then I also need to have references to the next and prev, right? So I'm just going to say next, or let's start with prev btn is document.query selector, and then I'll call the class prev, and then also I just copy it and I use it for the next one, right? Just like that. Now I need to add event listeners to this. So for the next BTN, I'm just going to say add event listener, click. And then for the second parameter is a function. I'm using ES6 arrow functions for this. And then here, what I want to do, I need to define an initial index, which I'm using let, again, ES6. It's like var in ES5. So I know that my first section will be 0, right? This is my first section. It will be with the index 0. So what I need to do when I click next, I'm just going to increase that index by 1 because I want to go to the next section, which is 1 in this case. When I'm on the next one, it's going to be 2 the next one. So I just increase them by 1. And now I can loop over my sections like these, sections for each. The first parameter can be a section and then I as the index. And the second parameter, there will be no second parameter, it's for each. So now that I loop over each sections, I have a reference to each of that section with the index of that section, right? So now if I check if I equals to the index, I want that section to come into the view, right? And in JavaScript, we have a handy functions called scroll into view, right? And then as a prompter, I can define behavior to be smooth, right? Just like that. So now if I press next, I expect the index to be increased to 1. And then I loop over the sections. The first one will match this if, and then it basically scrolls that section into view. So if I press next, let me see if I have any errors in my JavaScript. I usually check it in the console. So if I press next, it says for each is not a function. That's true because we have multiple sections, so I have to use query scroll all. So now, if I press next, you will see that the next section comes up, the second one, the third one, and the fourth one, right? So I have to use the same for the previous button. So I'm just going to say prev btn, but instead of plus plus, I need to use minus minus, right? So now if I press next, it goes to the next one, title 2, and if I press previous, it's going to go to the title 1. So far so good. Since we have 4 sections, the last section being the third, because in JavaScript and in computers usually indexes starts from 0 here. So I need to make sure that when I'm going next, when I increase, I need to make sure that if index is more than 2, I don't want the logic here to happen. Why? Because on the third index, which is the last index on my page, I don't want it to go any further. I don't want to increase more than 3. The same sort of validation I need to do on the prev button. So if index is less than 1, meaning that it's now 0, I don't want to decrease the number because I'm already on the first kind of section. So now here I will say return as well. So now if I press next, it goes to the second, third, and fourth. Now if I continue pressing next, as you can see, nothing happens because it checks this and the index is already 3, so it's not gonna run the next logic here. And then I have to press previous, 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 and then I'm gonna end up in title 1. So far so good. The next thing I want to add is this kind of animation that we had on the text. And the way to do that, I'm going to use CSS transforms, right? So since I have the text over here, I'm going to make sure that the initial opacity is 0, and then the initial transform property is translate Y and then 100 pixel. So initially I want the text to be 100 pixel down and then the opacity to 0. And then I can add a class to it, which I trigger using JavaScript. So let's say show. And then I make the opacity to be 1. And then I also set the transform translate to be 0, which is the initial place of it, right, in the page. I also make sure that I add a transition of maybe all, since I have opacity and transform, and then maybe something like 0.5 seconds for the duration and also 0.5 seconds, a little bit of a delay, right? So that we can actually see it coming up and down. So now that I know that I have this class to work with, what I need to do in JavaScript, I need to create a function. So I'm just going to create a function and I call it trigger text, or basically I'm going to call it toggle text, right? And this function will get an index. So now it also gets a state, and this state basically is show or hide, right? So if the state is show, I want to make sure that these text with the index here. So if you notice what we have in HTML, each text is within a section, right? So to find the text within the specific section, the first one, second one, third one, what I can do is I can loop over the sections. So I can do sections dot for each, right? And then obviously you know that the first parameter can have section and the index of that section, right? And then I can check if I equals to index, right? I want to add the class show to the text within that section. So I can do section dot query selector and then text class list dot add show, right? Just like that. So basically, when we're calling this function, we pass an index. So basically telling which of these texts within these four sections need to have class show, right? So we loop over the sections, and if the index of that section is the same as the index that we pass, we basically make sure that the text within that section has class show, right? Just like that. And then obviously we have state show. I need to make sure that else, if it's not show, I also do the same thing here, but instead I make sure that the class list will be, I will remove the class show, right? So now we have this pretty nice function. So initially, if I call this function with index 0 and a state show, I expect to see the first text over here. So I'm going to say toggle text, and then I will call it with 0, and then I pass show, right? So now you can see that we have our first animation happening, right? So if I save it again, uh, you'll see that we're going to have our animation. Toggle 0 and show. So basically what it does, it will add initially the opacity is 0 and the transform is translate 100 pixel, but we add this show, so it sets the opacity to 1 and translate to 0, and it has a transition on it, right? So now I need to make sure that I do it every time these section comes into the view. So if it's like this, I can just do toggle text, and then I pass the index, which is I, and then the state needs to be show, right? I should do this for the previous as well. So every time it comes to the view, I want to toggle that text with the show. But also what I need to do is to hide the previous one. So I'm going to use this same thing here. And then instead, I'm going to use index here because we decrease the index, for example, for the prev. So I want to make sure that the section after the one that we are operating now has hide. And the same thing we can do here for the next btn, right? So I will add hide. So now you can see that if I press next, we have the section coming into view, but also we have the animation on that section as well. So fourth one. Now if I go up, you'll see that we have the same animation, right? So now let's jump into the scroll thingy. So when I scroll down, I expect it to go to the next section, and when I scroll up, I expect it to go to the previous section. So if you notice what we did with the CSS on the main or the parent element here, we set the height to 100 VH and overflow to hidden. So this basically disables the scroll on the page. I can even show you. So usually we use the window.add event listener, and then we pass a scroll here, and then we have a function here passed. Let's just say console log I'm scrolling, right? This is usually what we used in the previous tutorials as well. So if I open the console, let me clear this. If I start scrolling, which I'm doing right now, you can see that it doesn't console log or doesn't log this, unfortunately. The reason is that when we set the main to be 100 VH and overflow hidden, it basically disables the scrolling, right? So now we can't use this event anymore. But thankfully, there is another event that we can use, and bear in mind this event might not work on all the browsers, right? So right now I can see that it works in Chrome, but if it didn't work on different browsers, if you tested it, please go ahead and find out what is the event that you can use instead of this. But for now, I'm gonna type the event that will work, and it's called will. So now if I scroll down, as I'm doing, you can see that we actually see the console. So we can take use of this event. Now, what I need to know is what is the direction of the scrolling? Am I like scrolling down or am I scrolling up? And the good thing is that this event listener, if I take a look at the event object that gets passed on, it has a it has a wheel delta object. So let me put it in a constant and call it delta, and let me console log it. Console log delta, right? So now if I scroll down, you'll see that the values are negative, right? But if I scroll up, you can see that the values are now positive. And that is something I can play with, right? So if the values are negative, as you can see, I'm scrolling down, it means that I need to go to the next section. If the values are positive, I need to go to you know, the previous section. So I can check if delta is less than 0, then I would like to do what I do when I click the next button, which is pretty much this. But then let me show you another trick. Since we already have the previous and next event listeners and they already have the logic to go to the next page and the previous page, why not just triggering the same click event as if we actually clicked on the next and previous? So to be able to do that, I can create an event. Let's call it next btn click. And then in JavaScript, the way to create events is calling new event. And obviously our event is click, right? So now I can just say next btn.dispatch event, and then I can pass the event. Let me just make it camel case. So next btn click, right? So when these sort of block runs, it creates a click event, and then it basically dispatch by this we dispatch that event to the next, as if we actually clicked manually on the next. So if delta is less than 0, it means that I want to go to the next. So I dispatch the next. Else, I'm gonna create the same thing, paste it over here, but this time is prev btn. Still, it's a click event, but I will dispatch it on the previous button, right? So now I just need to make sure that is prev, right? So now I have pretty much the skeleton of the event that I want, but you'll see it's not going to work. So if I scroll down, you'll see it just scrolls so many times, unfortunately. So I'm just doing one scroll, but it goes to the last one. So what we need to do is to handle that. The way we handle it is like this. I'm going to go ahead and do it so that you can see what I'm doing. So I'm going to create a constant count current time. And I'm using the date function. So I'm going to do new date in JavaScript and then call the method get time on it, which basically gives me the current time uh, in the long format. Basically, it's a current time, right, in milliseconds. So now what I can do, I can define a constant called animation duration. Let's say I put it 1000 seconds, right? So I can take use of this. How I can take use of this is that before I check the deltas, I'm going to check something. I'm going to check if my current time, so let me fix this, my current time minus the last time, right? The last time this will has been triggered, right? If it's less than the, what do you call it here? I call it animation duration. Animation duration, right? If this is the case, I just want to prevent the will event and I would return here, right? So now the question is, what is the last time? Obviously, last time is the same time at the end of the will operation. So here I can say last time equals to current time, right? So now pretty much everything is set. It checks if the if the last time that this scroll had happened minus the current, subtracting them from the current time, is less than the animation duration, just don't apply the wheel effect, right? So now if I go ahead and scroll down, you'll see that it says last time is not defined. Obviously, I need to obviously define it. So let last time initially 0. So now if I scroll down, you'll see that it only scrolls one page. And the reason being that it checks the current time and then it subtract the last time, which was the time that I started triggering, and if it was less than, animation duration, I basically prevent the default. So it doesn't call the wheel event anymore, and hence it's not gonna run this again. So if I scroll down, you'll see that it goes only one page at a time, right? Just like that. You can also play with the duration here. I basically, came up with this number based on the amount of time that it takes for this scroll to view to happen. I imagine that it's less than 1 second, but depends on if you use this scroll into view or use some other types of animations that you can have control over time, then you want to make sure that the animation duration is more than that time, right? So yeah, pretty much like this. Please, if you had any questions, please let me know. Let's make it 2000. So, all right, looks pretty cool. If you had any questions, please go ahead and put in the comment section. I really like this tutorial. It's so many possibilities that you can create using these techniques, and I hope that you like these tutorials. If you liked it, please go ahead and like, and please share these tutorials whenever you think it fits so that we get other peoples to now know and learn these techniques. Anyways, I wish you a great day and night and see you next time.